Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Every time I see the film, I get goosebumps with the ending. I could talk about the ending all day, but maybe it makes sense to begin with the origins of To Sleep With Anger. I think it draws on a lot of personal things for you, your southern roots and storytelling and folk culture. I think it'd be really nice for the audience to hear about how you kind of conceptualize this project.
Well, I was looking to, well, actually, it started with another project I wanted to do. It was a story, it was a true event that happened in my neighborhood where this young girl was killed by this gang member. She had witnessed him shooting a cab driver. And the police found out that she was an eyewitness, and they talked her into identifying the killer, and they promised her protection and things like that. And what they ended up doing was putting her name, address, and everything in the paper. And the guy had a twin brother who, and the killer was going to go to court. And he killed her, the young lady, before the court, before the trial. And so they didn't have anybody to convict him or to point a finger at him. And so they had to let him go, And so I started with that, but the people who had started the development process with me wanted to change it into some sort of Hollywood kind of thing, and wanted to change everything around, and I didn't, they didn't want that to happen, So I said, well, that's a true story, and I wanted to do it, and let's, as it happened, so I said, let me do something that's very simple, and that I wouldn't have any sort of attachment to, in a sense, and you can do whatever you want. And so I started to write this, and again, these guys had their hands in it, want to do this and that, and I said, no, you can't, because you're taking all you're taking the soul out of it, The whole thing about folklore, that's a part of it, I grew up in that kind of culture, and so they kept insisting that I make all these changes, and they wanted to do a story about the middle-class black family, and forget about the country and the historical element and things like that, forget about that. And so what they did was, and I'm sorry to use the word they because I don't want to name any names, but anyway, so, because in this business, they remember everything. So you never get a job again, which I haven't been working a while anyway. But anyway, so what they do is, in order to encourage you to make these changes, and they pay you on installments, If you do what they tell you to do, they'll send a check to your house, And if they don't, you call up, you say, well, I sent the other draft in, and they said, well, the check is in the mail. No, what they say is they would say that the check is upstairs. Okay, and so you call in again, you make some changes, you call in again, they don't like it, and you say, well, where's the money? So they hint at it and say, well, the check is upstairs. And you would want to say, well, it's so easy to just bring the check downstairs and put it in. No, that means make the changes. Okay, so I didn't do it, and so finally I get this letter in the mail saying, we're on a part company and all that sort of thing like that. And I had written this part in the movie where it's a long conversation that they have with the family. And they had made a film with Horton Foote, and
this is the Tender Mercies screenwriter.
Yeah. And so I come and I said, well, Horton Foote has it in his movie, this long conversation about the past and so forth. And this person said, well, you're not Horton Foote, I said, okay. And so I took the material back, and they sent me this letter saying, I'm never going to be a writer, But I'll tell you, if I have time, I'll tell you the end of that story, because it ends, and that was 1989 when I had all these issues with these people. And then it sort of resolved in 2006 or 7 or something like that. And I can either tell you now or tell you at the end of the thing.
Do you want to? You've got us all in suspense, I think.
Okay. I mean, the reason I like to tell it is because it sort of vindicates, and I was, I told you I got this nasty letter, right? So I'm not going to be a writer. So I'm in South Africa working on this film. I get this call from the States saying that we want to give you a prize, and I said, oh, great. He said, yeah, but you have to be here to get it. I said, but I can't. I'm in South Africa, and it takes 14 hours to do all this traveling to get back and then come back here. And they said, well, you got to be here to get it. I said, well, can't someone else come and get it? No, you have to be here. And I'm getting upset, kind of like, because it's a long trip, and so I'm about to say, no, forget about it, and I can't. And I said, well, what is the award? And the person said, well, it's the Hortonfoot Writing Award. And so I said, I'll be right there. Okay. And I really like to tell that story because I hope the person sometime who did that would be in the audience so it gets back to them. But anyway, a bit of English.
So are you here tonight?
Yeah.
And so talk about Danny Glover coming on board, because he's quite pivotal in getting the film made, and maybe you could segue into talking about the character of Harry or Hairy Man.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank several people. One, Kylie Chow, Linda Calistis, Ed Pressman, and people like that, because they're the ones who came along and picked up the film, and the idea, and tried to sell it, and took it everywhere. But it wasn't a movie. Every place we took it, they looked at it like, okay, well, they didn't want to invest in it, And so Danny had just finished Lethal Weapons 1 or 2, I can't remember which one it was, and he came aboard. And the moment Danny put his name to it, it became a movie. People started saying, well, first they didn't want to give us any money at all, and then they started to say, well, maybe, and started, we're talking about budget, and they start looking at it as a film. And so he was really instrumental in getting the film where it is now. And he's really a terrific person. He was the producer on the film, and he was a model person, and it was just extraordinary to work with.
And talking about developing the character of Hairy Man, you said that he's based on the trickster figure. Can you just kind of speak to that? Yeah,
well, there were two things. One, I wanted to because I grew up I'm from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and most of the people where I grew up in Los Angeles were from the South, from all places in the South, and there was this Southern culture, though you were removed from it in a way, physically, but everyone was from the South, and it was rare that you heard about someone being born in Los Angeles or California. There were people who were born there, but it was kind of rare, and my neighbor and everyone, and so we had this Southern atmosphere, and people would tell jokes and talk about the South a lot, and things like that, So I came up with this really wealth of material, and so looking back, I remember when I was in film school, the whole community had changed. People had moved out and left this vacuum, and crack came in and all this other thing, this sort of violence and stuff. And I was trying to figure out what could have led to this, and I noticed that one of the things that was missing was the Southern culture that was, was really important when I grew up, and so I wanted to do a story that involved that was a simple story, but it was sort of structured like a folklore tale, and so I looked around, I saw this story about Hairy Man, which is Southern folklore, trickster character, and I said that would be the structure, my film, and that would be the element in it, the theme, And so I started working on that, and it was basically a simple story about a family that's disrupted for whatever like families are, little minor things that grow into larger issues, things that destroys the family, and so that's the idea behind it.
And he's a really ambiguous character, because on the face of it, he's destructive, but as you say, he doesn't necessarily do anything actively bad. He may be disrespectful, and yet, on looking at it philosophically, I suppose, if he doesn't appear, then the family are not as close as they would have been had he not been there. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, what he does to the family ultimately brings them closer together. So, some of the conversations you had with Danny about that, did you share the same perspective on the character?
Yeah, and one of the things that I work with good actors is I worked with non-actors before, and you really have to work, things like that. But one of the things, and I had this sort of romantic notion, about, because you follow people like Bresson and people like that, and all these directors who use non-actors supposedly, so you had this illusion that non-actors are much better. But then you spend a lot of money trying to get them to perform, unless you typecast really well and practice, but you don't have that time, And so when you work with real actors, people like Mary Alice and Paul Butler and all those folks, they give you everything in an instant. They have this wealth of material, that if you want to make adjustments, there it is, And the thing with Danny was that, we had heard that he didn't want to do older characters, but he'd get typecast and things like that. And so we didn't ask him to do the hairy man part. We gave him the script to do one of the brothers. And he said, okay, he'll read it. And he did. And he got back to us, and we were going to rehearse the part and things like that. He said, I read the script, and I'll do what you want me to do. He said, but I would like to read for Harry Man. And I was surprised because he went with this rumor, and let's go right ahead. You read whoever you want to, and so he did, and that was it. Actually, because I had thought of having Julius Harris play the Harry Man character, because that's he was in Nothing But a Man, and I've always liked him in that, admired him.
Does he play the father
in
Nothing But a Man?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so I thought of him playing the character, and then when Danny wanted to play the character,
there you have it.
Yeah, there you have it in history, and so but we worked as we rehearsed for a very short time. We just actually it was just a reading, with the actors. We talked about the character and who they are, and exchanged ideas and things like that. And so you just let them do what they do the best.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll come out to you guys. So be prepared to ask some questions in a moment. The last thing I guess I want to ask you before we go to the audience is about music, the blues, maybe even specifically the motif of the trumpet, which is across the two films.
Yeah.
You have obviously the boy who can't play, and Harry makes the reference to him, like practicing, and then you have the ending where the trumpet kind of segues into the beautiful melody that closes the film. And then it's all over when it rains as well. Yeah. Could you just talk about the use of music and perhaps the symbolism of the trumpet?
Well, that's in the Pigeons is sort of autobiographical to some extent, because I used to play the trumpet. Someone
bring a trumpet.
No, you don't want to hear me play the trumpet. You take the trumpet. If you want to clear the audience, then it's okay. But no, I used to just practice for hours when I would come home, from junior high school, and it was my way of kind of like letting the neighbors know I exist or something. I don't know, but I knew I was disturbing them. I knew that I was was a problem, because I would raise the windmill up and put the trumpet right out there and just start blowing God knows what, and that's only, like the guy said, the only way you can get good, and so that's what I did, and I must mention Stephen James Taylor, who is a composer of the piece, and I'll tell you one story that I hope you don't mind. People are trying to do things cheap as possible, and it happens in all movies, particularly independent films, where you figure, well, if I can get something for free, we'll use that, and we don't have to pay for that. So anyway, so we had this a music consultant person, or what I forget what they actually call them now, but anyway, he came along and said, I'll get you, about $200,000 of orchestra, time and things like that. And all we have to do is use a few pieces of music, established music, things like that, and I gave him a list of pieces that I wanted. He said, oh, great, and it seemed perfect idea. And so Stephen James Taylor, who eventually ended up being the composer, we had talked to him, but he didn't have the money to do all this, give us this free orchestration and stuff. So we sort of like left him standing in a sense. And so I kept asking this guy who was supposed to provide us the music. I gave him names and things. He was just sort of ignore. And this went on until we got close to wanting to mix the film. And I got sort of suspicious then. But I was in New York doing something, and I got this music list, and it had all of this music on there, like Screaming Jay Hawkins, I Want to Put a Spell on You, stuff that didn't work. There was like, it just like someone hit you in the stomach, with a hatchet, and you just say, God, and it's like, calls up the office and I said, what is this? And they said, well, it's wall-to-wall sort of rock and roll stuff that had no relationship to the movie. And so I said, well, you're supposed to give us this music, this an orchestration, the stuff I picked out. And, oh, we can't. Okay. I said, forget it. We can't. It would have killed the movie. So I called Stephen James Taylor, who was, very, he said, I told him that we need to get the music within a couple of days. And he said, okay, I'll do what I can and we'll work it out. Without any, like being, selfish or anything like that, and say, well, I told you this and that kind of stuff like that, and now you're going to, you get what you deserve. No, he was very generous and very gracious and says, help me, and in a couple of days he had a score and everything. Wow. And we've been working in music ever since, since that. But he was a terrific person, and I can't give him enough credit, But the saying, the bottom line is trust your gut. If people are doing something and it seems like it's suspicious, don't follow them, whatever. So that was a lesson.
Trust your gut? Trust your gut, you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm more than that, in a sense, But I was very lucky to have Stephen James Taylor around.
Cool. So over to you guys. So we'll go to you first, and then we'll come up there.
Hey, Charles, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay. One of the things that I really enjoy about watching this film is that I am not of Southern descent, I'm of Asian descent, but there are things that you included that when I was watching with my mother like a while back, she noticed, she was like, wow, like you do that in 82, there are suspicions from the room to the marbles. So it's being able to see the diaspora play out, which was very beautiful. And one thing that I enjoy is that you don't spoon feed it to us. We're just thrust into the world, and we watch and we put our own clues together for ourselves, for the people that aren't aware. So I wanted to know, between the drafts that you wrote to get here, in what ways did you begin to allow the story to unfold without being so heavy-handed with it?
Did everyone hear the question? Yeah? Great.
Well, it was pretty much there. In fact, it was more there in a way, because all this folklore stuff, you had tons of it in it, and I just wanted to go back, because I didn't quite answer the question about the music thing. I say this because I don't want to leave you hanging. He said, well, he never, complete his thought, but And I usually don't, but this is one of the cases where the first part of the music, Sister Rosetta Thorpe, I listened to that when I was a kid all the time, you know, and that sort of like it just was left an impression, and it was every time you know, it was there all the time, you know. And so I always wanted to put that in a film, and most of the films, when I use music, like in Killer Sheep, I used to listen to these old 78s, you know, and so, and they were very fragile, and if you look at them hard, they'll break, you know. So what I wanted to do was to preserve them, you know. So I put them all in the movie, you know, and that way I kept them, you know, whatever. But anyway, but I used to listen to the blues because, first of all, I used to play a trumpet, you know, and you play a lot of blues things on it. But I did really, when I was a young person, I really didn't really understand the blues, you know, because I used to hang with older guys, you know, and they would like it, and therefore I had to like it, you know, even though I didn't know what they were listening to. Right? Until I got older and you start experiencing that thing, and then they become real to you. But in terms of the folklore, the people in my neighborhood, sort of like, not like, but they, it was a part of their life, you know. And for me, it was a period when I didn't really accept it. You know, you had these old folk ways, you know, and they seemed kind of embarrassing and things like that. And you know, like I know in the movie they talk about these strange people coming to your house, don't let them in, you know. And so there were these people that my mother and grandmother wouldn't let them come in, you know. It's just if they come in, don't someone might hear whatever it is, and on and on and on, you know. And but for you as a child, you look at them and you can't see anything wrong with them, you know. But there is a stigma that comes with them, you know. And I wanted to do with Harry, treat Harry that way. But if you looked at the film carefully, you see Harry never did anything that was obviously wrong or anything like that. He told the truth basically, you know. And so, but of course he must have done something, though. But it's all circumstantial, you know. So I wanted to have that kind of ambiguity, you know, about a character.
And that is kind of connected to your question, I believe, in terms of just trusting the audience and trusting them to sit within an ambiguous character, and specifically to the question, leaving things out, maybe redrafting and letting things breathe and letting things not be so obvious.
Yeah, well, I particularly about the Danny's character, I wanted people to come to their own conclusion if he was good, if he was good or bad, you know, and surprisingly, people have different opinions, wide range of different. In some cities, an angel, you know.
A show of hands, Angel.
Well, this is a different audience.
Hard crowd.
Yeah, it really is. Good Lord, you know, he's convicted. I mean, but on circumstances like, well, I would say like Trump, but that's a different story.
No Trump zone in here.
No, I'm joking. I'm just joking about Trump. But anyway, yeah.
Question up, yeah. I had a question about when you were writing it, putting this together, what genre you had in mind when doing this. It seemed to teeter between comedy and drama, and then we get to like a dramatic climax or moment, and then you undercut it with some absurd comedy. So I was curious about that.
So the question is about what genre you were looking at when you were making the film, because it traverses a whole bunch of different tones. So
yeah, that's a very good question, and it's one I'm gonna have trouble answering it to in a certain way, because I just looked at the film as a story. You know, I didn't try to. It certainly wasn't a Western. I was certainly staying away from that. But anything else, I mean, it. But it's like life in general. I mean, there's these moments where it has everything, irony, ambiguity, everything. You know, it encompasses. You know, a tragedy one moment, you laugh at it another period. You know, things like that. And people say some really interesting things and profound things that have different reactions. Like, I remember when I was doing Killer Sheep, someone was saying, well, all these, stereotypical things in there, like exaggerated. Well, and they had a humorous element to it, but they weren't. They were based on actual, if you've seen a movie, you see that all these things, they must be exaggerated. No, they actually happened. Like, for example, I used to have all these old cars, not all at the same time, but when it break down, you get another one. And I don't think I ever had anything above a 54 Chevy or something like that. They were all some. I wish I kept them because they're probably worth a lot now. But they were always breaking down. But then you can fix them very easily because you can see everything. The motor, where the generator is. These new cars, you can't. It's amazing. But anyway, so I had this generator that went bad, and so I had to take it out, and then walk about 3 or 4 miles to a generator repair shop. And these old places, it's actually in the Watts too. And so I go to the shop and I told the guy, look, I have a bad generator. He says, put it on the table back here, right here, and go in the back, and you see that pile of generators? Pick one that'll fit your car, and paid him for it, and walked all the way back, put it in my car. It didn't work. So I go back take the generator out, and this is like a lot of labor, right? And you go all the way back, take it back to the generator shop, and the guy, he said, it doesn't work. He said, put it on the table and go back and get one out of So you go back and dig through that thing, and you see yours still in there. And it's been less than an hour that it's been, and he hasn't done anything to he hasn't, And so it's this continuous kind of absurd kind of thing that you experience all the time, and so there's a lot of things like that when I was guys used to experience, I say guys particularly because, girls weren't working on cars at that, but so it wasn't inclusive, but anyway, So there was a lot of really, when you look back on it, a strange thing. I mean, in Killer Sheep, you see this motor in a house, in the front end of a car. And I went into this guy's house, who was a friend of mine. In fact, he's in the movie. And so eventually I asked him, what do you do with this big old motor in the front room? And he said, and it's very reasonable when you think about it. He said, if I had it outside, someone would steal it. And you said, okay. I'm not going to argue with that because it's the truth, And so what do you do, I mean, that's the way life was, And so when I was making the story, I wanted it to be included all of those things, It wasn't, just a family drama, It had all those things in it, So I don't know. So.
Hi, I'm just hoping you oppose the punchline.
No. I am so ashamed. I say, I'll tell you what, because I don't remember it. And in both cases, those things, at some point, someone would tell me, well, if you read this one segment of the Bible, that you'll find this, And I keep, when I'm in front of the audience, I think I can remember it, Instead of writing it down, whatever it is, I just depend on this memory that's disappearing, that's fading, and so I forget. And so I apologize, and I swear the next audience I come to, I will try to look through all these folders and whatever it is and find what it is. I don't know. And people would tell you, I mean, there's all people, I'm sure there's someone in the audience who knows but too shy to say anything, Tell me, tell us, So,
Right, we got time for one more question. We'll come to the question right at the back.
Hi. Seeing the film this time, I was really struck by how the women in the film were kind of the moral center, holding it all together without being two-dimensional characters. And I was curious why you felt like the women were able to resist Harry's influence, or why only the men fell prey to it. Not that they weren't affected, but it really seemed to affect them differently.
Well, to actually, Susie is partly responsible for what's going on in the family, in the house, and it's in an ironic way because, I mean, I wanted to have a person who was virtuous and good and things like that, you know, and at the same time have it whereas that's left the door open for Harry, because like Hattie, who's been through, you know, a life of, you know, of whatever, you know, of going to juke joints and stuff like that, singing and growing up in a sort of negative environment, so to speak, knows evil when she sees it, you know. But Hattie didn't, and she invites this person into her house that is what you might consider evil, and but her family is you know, such where they can be easily, you know, become victims of this Harry-like character, you know, and so, but her thing is, my idea was that if you're good, really good, then you are oblivious to violence and you know, evil and things like that. So you wouldn't know it if you see it necessarily, you know. And so she walks through this dream world in a certain sense, and she says to Hattie, I can't just kick him out, just dry long so without any evidence. I can't, you know, he hasn't done anything to me personally, you know. But in a sense, the character is, but she can't, you know, it's nothing concrete that she can pin on him. So she accepts them, you know. And I think that's the problem with brings it on, you know, having someone like that, you know, who believes in everyone, believes in the innocence of everyone, you know. And yeah, and the women in at least Junior's wife carries on this tradition because she follows, you know, you know, you know, her culture, you know, history and things like that, you know, and Babe brother, the other brother, just wants money. You know, he doesn't care about his roots or anything about history, and so without a foundation, when he's saying that he's subject to these evil spirits and things like that, and that's one of the reasons why I did the film. It's like having come up with folk tales and things like that. It sort of helps you kind of understand supposedly what life is about, you know, and so those people who do have that knowledge of the past, you know, are somewhat saved, you know, or have a foundation that they can rely on, or, you know, find salvation in. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Well, listen, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you
Yeah.
for your great questions. Please
Yeah,
give
thank
it
you.
up for Charles Burnett. Thank you.